Goblin Reddit. Today's story is...
My unfaithful husband humiliated me for being old, stole $15,000 from my savings, and 3 days later a text message destroyed his career, his reputation, and his future. I am 42 years old, I am a woman, and it is almost comical how I am writing this, although, for me, the situation is far from funny. Here I am, with an eye patch, divorce papers on the table, and a completely broken heart. My husband Dylan and I have been married for 8 years. Our 4-year age difference never seemed to be a problem until recently. Sure, there were the occasional jokes about me being a gold digger or him having an older model, but they were always followed by reassuring words about how he found my maturity attractive. At least, that's what I thought. This dynamic continued until recently, when his comments about my age started to take on a more hurtful tone. She lost interest in our intimacy, always finding excuses related to work stress or some incident that had occurred during the day. I tried absolutely everything. I bought new lingerie, I prepared her favorite meals, I even suggested weekend getaways to reconnect. Nothing managed to shorten the growing distance that was forming between us. Our last anniversary was particularly revealing. I meticulously organized a surprise getaway to the luxurious resort where we had enjoyed our honeymoon. I spent weeks coordinating with his assistant to make sure his schedule was completely free. However, he ended up getting drunk at the hotel bar and falling asleep before we could even toast to our marriage. The next morning, he was more interested in checking his phone than enjoying the couple's massage he had so eagerly booked. When I expressed my disappointment, he replied with obvious irritation, "Not everyone gets excited about the same things as people your age." His long days at the office began to include mandatory happy hours, to which I never received an invitation. Suddenly, his phone appeared to be password protected. He began going to the gym at unusual times and buying new clothes that he never wore when he was with me. All these behaviors were classic signs of infidelity. 3 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with a detached retina. Although it is not a life-threatening condition, it requires surgery to avoid permanent vision loss in the affected eye. The most renowned specialist was in my hometown, 2 hours away. I asked Dylan to come with me, thinking that this medical crisis would remind him of the part of our marriage vows that talks about being together in sickness and in health. His response was that it would be too embarrassing for him to be seen there with me. When I asked him what exactly he meant by that, he muttered something about running into old classmates of mine and having to explain why he had married someone considerably older than himself. I then asked my sister, Aline, who lives in my hometown, to pick me up and take me to the consultation. The night before I was due to leave, I found Dylan frantically typing messages on his phone in our study. When I walked in, he visibly jumped and quickly turned the device upside down. "Work stuff," he said, with an obviously forced smile. I didn't even have the energy to start an argument. However, as I turned to leave, I noticed a gift bag hidden behind his desk. Expensive lingerie from a boutique I had never set foot in. You can imagine how I felt, but I decided not to confront him just before undergoing such an important surgery. The trip to my hometown with Aline was extremely difficult. I couldn't stop thinking about that gift bag. I was sure that the gift wasn't meant for me, but I figured there would be enough time to confront him when I returned, when I was better. The next morning, while they were preparing me for surgery, my phone started to ring. I thought it might be Dylan wishing me luck. Instead, I received a text message that said, "I can't take it anymore. You're old, I deserve better. Don't bother coming home." Attached to the message, I found divorce papers that, apparently, I had been preparing in secret for weeks. My blood pressure dropped so sharply that the nurse asked me if I was all right. I must have turned as pale as a ghost at such a shock. I gave my phone to my sister before they took me to the operating room, knowing that I would soon be under anesthesia and, at least temporarily, I could forget about the whole situation. When I woke up, with bandages covering one eye and blurred vision in the other, Eileen was faithfully by my side. From her facial expression, I knew that I had woken up, but only to find an even worse nightmare. She informed me that Dylan had called, demanding to know when I would sign the papers so that he could get on with his life. He even had the audacity to ask if he could sign them digitally. Elaine told him exactly where he could put the documents. My sweet sister, a kindergarten teacher, had a surprising amount to say to him. In other circumstances, it would have been comical to hear my sister express herself in that way. The following days were a confusing mixture of pain medication, eye drops, and crying spells that intensified the pain in my newly operated eye even more. The doctors warned me that emotional stress could significantly complicate my recovery. During my post-operative consultation, the specialist asked me about my blood pressure. When I finally broke down and told him what had happened with Dylan's message, he was so horrified that he immediately called the hospital's social worker to talk to me. She gave me information about therapeutic resources and support groups for people going through traumatic divorces. I thanked her politely, although I felt embarrassed to be discussing these personal issues with my eye specialist instead of a therapist. 3 days after my surgery, my neighbor called to ask about my health. We have a fairly close relationship, so she was aware of my situation. During our conversation, she mentioned seeing a blonde woman who had moved into my house the day before. She also said that they had been quite noisy during the night. My first impulse was to call my best friend to unburden myself, but I hesitated. I didn't have the strength to keep talking about it. Such a conversation would only worsen my post-operative state, which I needed to spend in my hometown until I completed my medical follow-up. When I finally summoned the courage to call Dylan, his cruelty surprised even me, who already knew this new side of him. He confessed that he had been planning to leave me for months, that his new girlfriend was barely 24 years old, and that, unlike his feelings for me, she didn't make him feel sick when she undressed. He laughed openly when I reminded him that the house was legally mine. His response was, "Good luck enforcing that from another state with your pirate eye patch." What Dylan doesn't know, or has conveniently forgotten, is that I bought our house with my inheritance 4 years ago. That property is not subject to marital property division, as he apparently believes. I got his current job myself, after he was unemployed for 8 long months. I called in favors from college friends to secure him that position. Ironically, it was precisely there that he met his new partner. During those 8 months of unemployment, I covered absolutely all of his expenses. His car payments, his student loans, even the suit he wore to the job interview. I meticulously edited his resume, practiced potential interview questions with him. I firmly believed in his abilities when no one else was willing to give him a chance. And how did he repay that unwavering loyalty? By sending me divorce papers by text message while I was in surgery and installing his new girlfriend in my house in a matter of days. So this is where I might become the villain of this story. Yesterday, I contacted my real estate agent. She has a lovely family and is urgently looking for a rental in our neighborhood. They can move in the next few weeks. I am also in touch with Marcus, the CFO of Dylan's company and an old friend of mine from university. I have reviewed receipts for dinners supposedly held with clients. There is a possibility that many of these supposed clients never existed, and were in fact meetings with his new partner. I think it is important that my friend examine these records in detail to investigate the real destination of the company's resources. There is something else that deeply concerns me. 2 years ago, Dylan borrowed $15,000 from my personal savings for what he called an urgent investment opportunity. He promised to pay it back with interest in 6 months. That deadline came and went, and every time I brought up the subject, he immediately became defensive or changed the subject. Eventually, stopped asking to keep the peace in our home, resigning myself to losing that money. Now I wonder if those funds were used to win over his current girlfriend. I sit with my fingers hovering over Marcus's contact, contemplating whether I should make that call. Dylan has taken everything from me, and part of me wants to return the favor. However, another part of me wonders if that would make me as despicable as he is. So here's my question. Would I be acting wrongly if, by kicking my unfaithful husband and his girlfriend off my property, I force them to find another place to live? Would I be crossing an ethical line if I shared my concerns about their financial practices with their superior? Update 1. Well, here is the current situation. A whole week has passed between my original post and this one, which will be my first update. I'm not sure if there will be more, but this is at least the first one. Many people have encouraged me to contact Marcus, arguing that it is perfectly normal for a person to defend themselves in such circumstances. Dylan thinks I'm worthless, that I'm completely useless because I'm an old woman, according to him. Well, then he shouldn't benefit from the favors provided by old women like me, getting him a job, housing, and everything else he has obtained through me. I called Marcus the day after publishing my story. He had been informed about my surgery, so the first thing he did was to ask me kindly about my state of health. He showed more concern as a friend than my own husband. Initially, I couldn't mention the suspicious expenses to him because he was genuinely interested in my recovery and wanted to know if the operation had been successful. However, when I finally broached the subject with him, the conversation took on a considerably more serious tone. I explained in detail what had happened over the last few days, including my suspicions about possible irregular expenses. He assured me that he would investigate the matter thoroughly, verifying which clients he had actually met with and the expenses Dylan had charged to the company. Was what I did wrong? Honestly, I'm not sure. Do I care at this point? After his behavior towards me, not really. I didn't fabricate false evidence against him. It wasn't necessary. The truth was damning enough, as even Marcus recognized that an employee with such a high level of expenses was unusual. Certainly, in a large corporation, these details could go unnoticed, unless someone specifically pointed out the irregularity. A few days later, a lease was signed for my house. The family concerned, a truly lovely couple with 2 children, will be able to move in next week. My real estate agent was surprised at the haste, but avoided asking questions when I mentioned circumstances related to my divorce. Yesterday, I sent a message to Dylan informing him that the new tenants would be moving in next week and that he should vacate my property within 24 hours. I included a specific reminder stating that the property is exclusively in my name and that the new tenants have precise instructions to call the police immediately if he was still there when they arrived. His reaction was instantaneous and explosive. 15 missed calls in barely 20 minutes. When I finally answered, he was so enraged that he could barely articulate coherent sentences. He threatened me with legal action, restraining orders, and even ruining my professional reputation. I calmly reminded him that the house had been purchased with my personal inheritance and that his name did not appear on any official documents. He screamed wildly through the phone that I couldn't do this to him. My only response was, "Watch me do it, because that's exactly what I'm doing." Shortly after, I received a message from an unknown number. The person identified herself as Dana, the very name of the woman she had replaced me with. Apparently, Dylan had informed her that I was making them homeless out of simple jealousy and that I had no legal recourse to do so. I almost laughed at the irony. This woman was judging me based solely on Dylan's lies, while I slept peacefully in my bed at home. I did not reply to her message, but I kept it carefully. Something told me it might come in handy later. Several hours passed. Dylan then sent me a voice message that sounded disturbingly calm. He mocked my pathetic attempt to make them homeless, claiming that he and Dana were already planning to move to her house anyway. He called me again a ridiculous old woman desperate, and promised that I would regret complicating things. Was he really threatening my integrity now? I should feel victorious in this situation. Instead, I find myself awake at 3 a.m, mentally replaying her threat over and over again. Dylan knows influential people in my industry. He has access to professional contacts that I have built up over decades. Could he really damage my career? What if the evidence I provided to Marcus is not enough to launch a formal investigation? Have I started a war that I can't win? My follow-up medical appointment is scheduled for tomorrow. The specialist will assess the progress of the healing in my eye. I hope to be able to conclude this process and return soon. Staying away from all this only increases my anxiety considerably. Update 2. To establish a clear timeline, my eye surgery took place exactly 2 weeks ago. For those who have asked about my condition, my eye is healing satisfactorily. The doctors say that my vision should fully recover in approximately 1 month. Meanwhile, my new tenants moved in without any problems 5 days ago. Dylan should have collected his belongings by then, although I have not asked for specific details about this process. However, I reviewed the recordings from the house's security system, where I could see him and her hastily packing their things. The recordings also revealed that he took items that definitely did not belong to him. My grandmother's valuable antique silverware, electronic devices purchased by me, and even framed photographs of my family. I have meticulously documented all of this to present to my lawyer. On the other hand, I have not yet received any concrete news from Marcus. Could Dylan have managed to manipulate the situation to evade consequences? I have written and subsequently deleted dozens of follow-up emails, trying not to project despair or a desire for revenge, but I can't help wondering if my plan has failed, or if justice will eventually be done. Yesterday, while my sister was at work, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting visitors, so I cautiously looked through the peephole using my better eye. On the porch, a young blonde woman was moving nervously, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. It was Dana. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't there. I remained completely still by the door, even holding my breath. Then she knocked again, claiming that she knew full well that I was inside and that she just wanted to talk about an important matter. When I finally opened the door, I immediately noticed that she had been crying. She got straight to the point. She had just discovered that Dylan had been lying to her systematically all this time. I invited her in, considering that, in these circumstances, the enemy of my enemy could become my ally. What followed was like a surreal therapeutic session shared with my husband's lover. Both of us, victims of the same manipulative man, comparing notes on his intricate web of lies. Over the next hour, Dana revealed a particularly disturbing story to me that affected me deeply. Dylan had constructed an extremely complex fiction about our relationship, telling her different lies during the different stages of his deception. Initially, he told her that I was simply his old flatmate, a woman harboring unrequited feelings towards him. Later, as the relationship progressed, he admitted that I was indeed his wife, but claimed that we were separated, describing the situation as if I were someone obsessive and vindictive. He assured her that our divorce was practically finalized, pending only bureaucratic formalities. According to Dana, he characterized me as a bitter, middle-aged woman unable to accept that he had moved on with his life. The reference to middle-aged was particularly painful. He promised he would sell his share of our house once I signed the divorce papers, using the money to travel around the world together. But that wasn't all. Dana confessed that Dylan had indeed been taking clients to corporate dinners, but he had also been including her in these same establishments, using the company card to cover the expenses. The previous week, she had heard him on the phone, desperately begging someone called Marcus to delay an internal audit until he could fix things. So the investigation had indeed begun. This confirmation should have given me satisfaction, but there was no time to experience emotions when there was still more information to discover. Dana went on to say that Dylan had also asked her for loans, supposedly for the same investments that I knew all too well. The memory of my $15,000 flashed through my mind. When Dana asked him for formal documentation about these investments, he reacted angrily, accusing her of unjustified mistrust. Finally, she handed over almost $8,000, representing all her savings as a receptionist. But if you think my reaction was excessive for making that call and dealing with the house, it's because you haven't yet fully met Dana, who had even more information to share with me because of her justified anger. She showed me text conversations where Dylan promised to marry her immediately after I signed the divorce papers, and he received his supposed share of our common property. However, the truly shocking part was yet to come. There were messages addressed to another woman named Carly containing similar romantic promises. These were dated just 2 days before. Dana had discovered these conversations the night before. What's more, Carly turned out to be the daughter of Dylan's boss. They had been seeing each other for weeks, simultaneously while he was living with Dana, assuring her that she was the love of his life. The messages were quite explicit. This man had transcended simple infidelity to become a true emotional predator. Before leaving, Dana offered me access to Dylan's email. Apparently, he used the same password for all his accounts, and she had been monitoring his communications. He confessed to me that he had used her in exactly the same way as me. I have always tried to act correctly. Maintaining ethical behavior has been fundamental to my personal identity. But where has that behavior led me? Perhaps it is time to partially abandon my usual rectitude and cross certain established boundaries. Update 3. Exactly 3 days ago, everything changed drastically. For those of you wondering if I finally checked Dylan's electronic accounts, I should clarify that I did not. Not because I lacked interest, but because it turned out to be completely unnecessary. 3 days ago, my phone literally exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls from Dylan in just 20 minutes. Each one went straight to voicemail. I didn't even need to listen to the messages to understand exactly what had happened. The texts that followed later made it perfectly clear. He was desperately wondering how he could do this to me, claiming that he knew for sure that I was behind it all. He begged me to call him back, informing me that they were pressing formal charges against him. He insisted that his life was completely ruined because of me, that he would lose his professional license and would never be able to work in the financial sector again. His last message, written entirely in capital letters, demanded that I answer the phone immediately, followed by an impressive collection of insults. Through mutual acquaintances, I was able to find out the full story. My conversation with Marcus had effectively triggered an internal audit, revealing a systematic pattern of irregularities. The expenses related to dinner shared with Dana turned out to be insignificant compared to what was later discovered. Once the finance team delved deeper into the investigation, they found years of fraudulent reports, completely fictitious clients, and embezzled funds. These were small discrepancies specifically designed not to arouse suspicion, but they had been going on for so long that the total sum was considerable. My $15,000 has been considerably relegated in importance. We are talking about thousands of dollars that have simply disappeared. Apparently, Dylan had been operating a sophisticated scheme for almost 3 whole years. He created fictitious accounts for supposed clients, systematically falsified expense reports, and appropriated the corresponding reimbursements. He had also been offering, quote, private investment opportunities to legitimate clients, receiving their money in cash. Some of these clients were people with limited financial resources who agreed to hand over their savings only because he worked at a prestigious firm. The company is currently contacting all these people, many of whom were completely unaware that they had been defrauded. That same afternoon, Marcus called me personally to inform me that the police might need to interview me as a witness in the fraud case against Dylan. I assured him that I was completely willing to cooperate without needing any further insistence and that I would commit to providing all the relevant information I might have. Later that night, I received a call from Dana. She told me that she had definitively ended her relationship with Dylan. Surprisingly, he had tried to hold her responsible for his fraudulent activities, claiming that the whole operation had been her idea. Naturally, no one believed such an accusation. I should feel completely victorious. This was precisely the revenge I had set in motion. However, I experienced completely different feelings. Strangely enough, I don't consider my life to be automatically better just because Dylan's has fallen apart. Don't get me wrong, I firmly believe that the consequences for Dylan are absolutely fair. Not for me personally, but for his company, and especially for the innocent people he deceived. However, this does not miraculously transform my own situation. The events did not end there. At approximately 3 a.m, I was woken by insistent banging on the door of my sister's house. In the weeks since our last encounter, Dylan seemed to have aged a whole decade. Ironically, were it not for my eye condition, he would now be the one who appeared to have stolen the cradle or to have an older model. He showed signs of alcohol intoxication, because when I told him to leave because of the inappropriateness of the hour, he was slurring his words noticeably. My comment about the inappropriateness did not only refer to the time, but to the whole situation as a whole. Through the door, Dylan offered one desperate apology after another. He acknowledged having made a, quote, serious mistake and tried to modify his previous narrative. Suddenly, he was describing me as mature and beautiful instead of old and ridiculous as he had done previously. He offered me absolutely everything, from refunding my $15,000 in full to agreeing to marriage counseling and even moving permanently to my hometown. He screamed wildly, "Whatever you want, just please open the door." It was particularly ironic, considering that, until a few days ago, he had threatened to completely destroy my life. Now he was the one begging at my door while his existence was reduced to ashes. The most shocking thing is that I didn't really do much to cause this situation. I simply communicated a legitimate suspicion to Marcus, but the reality turned out to be considerably worse. It was his own actions that determined this outcome, including the damage caused to Dana, who subsequently presented additional evidence that she possessed. Ultimately, his obsession with youth has caused him innumerable problems. In the most insignificant but enormously satisfying gesture of my life, I sent her a single message: "This old woman is not going to save you this time." After reading my reply, she remained in front of the door until dawn. Occasionally, she would utter my name in a low voice. At intervals, she would tap weakly on the door. I retired quietly to my room and inwardly enjoyed every moment of this situation. I am very grateful that my sister is a particularly deep sleeper, because the next day I said to her, "Did you hear what happened last night?" And she simply replied, "What? Did the neighbors argue again?" Consequently, I had to tell her the whole incident. By the time we finished breakfast, he had already left, as she herself verified his absence. Update 4. Several weeks have passed since my surgery. Specifically, 5 full weeks since I rented out my house, and 4 since Dylan's world finally fell apart. Over the last few weeks, I have been interviewed twice by the police regarding the financial frauds committed by Dylan. I shared absolutely all the information I knew, which honestly was not significantly more extensive than what I had already communicated to Marcus. I also discovered that Dylan tried to implicate me directly in his illicit activities, suggesting that I was fully aware of his scams and that I had personally benefited from his fraudulent operations. Fortunately, the available evidence did not support his accusations at all. Our strictly separate bank accounts and the indisputable fact that our lifestyle never reflected any hidden additional income were determining factors in my favor. The morning after Dylan's late-night visit, I immediately contacted my lawyer. She drew up new divorce papers that made the original version presented by Dylan look extremely generous in comparison. With overwhelming evidence of his irregular financial behavior and his complete abandonment during my medical crisis, she assured me that the legal process would be relatively simple. He was not exaggerating. Dylan's growing legal problems made him particularly eager to reach a quick settlement. His court-appointed lawyer had clearly warned him that contesting the terms of the divorce would only complicate his already compromised criminal situation considerably. He signed my terms without objection. He formally waived any property claims. He also waived any claim to financial support. By my reckoning, the divorce will be settled in record time. Update 5. I fully understand that you want to know what has finally happened to Dylan. After all, when I made my last post, he was facing numerous legal problems. I can confirm that he has not reappeared unexpectedly in the night, and my sister continues to enjoy her characteristic deep sleep. Let me first talk about my current situation. I have returned for good to my city because here I have my job, my friends, and practically my whole life. However, I have moved to a different house that I am renting temporarily. I recognize that it would have been more financially convenient to keep my old house, thus avoiding paying rent. But to remain there, constantly surrounded by all those painful memories? No, definitely not. Instead, I opted to move to a smaller space, with the rent I received from my original property perfectly covering the cost of this new place, even allowing me to save a reasonable amount. Perhaps eventually I will consider the possibility of finding love again. I'm not sure. I'll just let time determine that. The divorce process is completely finalized, with no pending documentation to be filed, signed, or otherwise processed. Officially, we are no longer married. The agreement specifically stated that each party would exclusively retain what rightfully belonged to them, with the exception of my $15,000 and the items he wrongfully removed from my residence. With those items recovered, I honestly no longer have any concerns about what might happen to Dylan in the future. Personally, he could end up living under a bridge, roasting chestnuts to survive. In order for you to properly understand that humorous reference, I must first explain his current legal problems. And there have certainly been many over the past few months. From his company, which fired him for just cause, to the formal lawsuit for embezzlement, supplemented by a class action lawsuit filed by all the people he systematically defrauded. A lawsuit that, by the way, his former company also officially joined, not exclusively to restore its corporate image, but because Dylan's direct superior took a particularly personal interest in closely supervising the case, considering that Dylan had inappropriately involved his daughter. Surprisingly, no criminal charges were brought against him. They reached an agreement that completely eliminated the criminal charges if he agreed to reimburse every last cent to every person harmed by his scams. Consequently, he was forced to hand over absolutely all his available capital, and in addition, to take out a loan of considerable size. According to the information I have received, he has asked his parents for financial assistance to obtain this loan. However, the fundamental condition to avoid imprisonment required the immediate repayment of the entire debt, leaving him with absolutely no alternatives. He must currently find himself in an extremely precarious financial situation if the figure I have heard is accurate. I would be genuinely surprised if he had even minimal resources to survive on. With this statement, I believe I have fully conveyed the situation.